The late-night panel of liberal TV hosts burst into laughter as they discussed Tiffany Trump's pregnancy announcement. One host smirked, "Another Trump in the world? Just what we needed," while another added, "Imagine the baby shower, gold-plated, diapers and a tiny MAGA hat." The audience chuckled along as the jabs continued, with snide remarks about Tiffany's place in the Trump family and whether she'd ever be as relevant as her father's other children. Social media exploded overnight. Some viewers cheered the hosts for their satire, but many found the remarks cruel and unnecessary. While Tiffany stayed silent, another member of the Trump family was watching, and he had something to say. Barron Trump, typically reserved and far from the media spotlight, decided it was time to break that silence. The youngest Trump, now a towering presence both literally and figuratively, took to social media with a calm yet firm response. In a carefully worded post, he addressed the so-called comedy. "It's one thing to disagree with my family's politics," he wrote. "It's another to mock a woman for celebrating the life she's bringing into the world. My sister deserves happiness, and no amount of late-night cheap shots will change that." The response was immediate. The post went viral within hours, drawing praise even from those who weren't Trump supporters. "Did not expect to agree with a Trump, but Barron is 100% right," one comment read. Even a few celebrities, usually critical of the family, admitted the TV hosts had crossed a line. Realizing the backlash wasn't fading, one of the comedians issued a half-hearted apology on air. "Look, we joke about public figures, that's what we do," he said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "But if Tiffany or her family felt hurt, hey, congratulations on the baby." The moment was brief, but the damage was done. Barron Trump had stepped up and defended his sister, proving that class and dignity sometimes speak louder than a room full of laughter. Despite the lukewarm apology, the fallout continued. Clips of the original segment kept circulating online, fueling the debate over whether political satire had gone too far. Even mainstream media outlets, often critical of the Trump family, acknowledged that mocking a pregnant woman had struck a nerve with the public. Meanwhile, Tiffany Trump, known for keeping a lower profile than her siblings, finally broke her silence. In a rare public statement, she addressed the controversy with grace. "I appreciate the overwhelming support from those who believe every mother deserves respect, regardless of politics," she wrote. "My focus is on my growing family, and no amount of negativity can take away this joy." Her words only amplified the backlash against the TV hosts. Sponsors of the late-night show began receiving pressure from viewers to pull their ads. Some did. The network, sensing trouble, scrambled to contain the damage. The host who had led the mockery was forced to issue a second, more sincere apology. This time it wasn't just a throwaway remark, it was an entire segment dedicated to addressing the situation. "Sometimes, in the pursuit of comedy, we forget the human side of things," he admitted. "Tiffany Trump didn't deserve that, and I truly regret my words." Barron Trump, however, had already moved on. The 18-year-old had no interest in dragging out the controversy. His message had been simple but powerful, and it had done its job. Tiffany felt supported, the hosts had been humbled, and the public was reminded that decency should come before politics. As days passed, the story faded from the headlines. But one thing remained clear. Barron Trump, often underestimated, had proven that sometimes silence isn't the best response. When the moment called for it, he spoke up, and when he did, the world listened. In the weeks that followed, the controversy over the late-night host's remarks gradually died down, but its impact lingered. Tiffany Trump continued to embrace her pregnancy, sharing occasional glimpses of her journey with gratitude and positivity. The outpouring of support from people across the political spectrum had reaffirmed her belief that, despite their differences, Americans still valued basic decency. As for Barron, his unexpected stand had thrust him into the public eye in a way he had never sought. He was used to being in the background, rarely making headlines, but now people saw him in a different light. His calm yet firm defense of his sister had earned him respect, even from some who had long dismissed the Trump family. The late-night show, meanwhile, struggled to shake off the controversy. Viewership dipped, and sponsors who had distanced themselves weren't in a hurry to return. Though the hosts tried to move on, the incident remained a blemish on their reputation. The internet never forgets, and every time they tried to mock another public figure, critics reminded them of their hypocrisy. But for Barron, life continued as usual. He hadn't spoken out for attention or to score political points. He had simply defended his family. And that, in the end, was what people respected the most. Tiffany eventually gave birth to a healthy baby, surrounded by loved ones. As she held her child for the first time, she smiled, knowing that no amount of mockery could take away the joy of motherhood. And somewhere in the background, watching over his sister and his new niece or nephew, Barron Trump stood tall, silent, once more, but with a presence that no one would soon forget. As Tiffany Trump settled into motherhood, the media gradually moved on, shifting its focus to the next big controversy. But those who had followed the ordeal hadn't forgotten. Barron Trump's quiet but powerful stand remained a topic of discussion, with some even calling it his defining moment, a rare glimpse into the character of a young man who had largely remained a mystery. Despite the growing curiosity about him, Barron stayed out of the spotlight. He wasn't interested in interviews or capitalizing on the moment. While political pundits speculated about his future, some predicting he might follow in his father's footsteps, Barron ignored the noise. His only concern had been standing up for his family, and as far as he was concerned, that chapter was closed. Tiffany, on the other hand, continued to receive overwhelming support. Messages of encouragement poured in from mothers across the country, many of whom shared their own stories of being judged or ridiculed. Inspired by the response, she decided to use her platform to advocate for women, particularly mothers, to be treated with more respect, regardless of their last name. The late-night hosts, meanwhile, struggled to regain credibility. While some fans remained loyal, others couldn't shake the feeling that the jokes had gone too far. Every time they took another jab at a public figure, critics were quick to remind them of the time they mocked a pregnant woman and had to be called out by an 18-year-old. Months later, during a rare public appearance, Barron was asked about the incident. A reporter, hoping to draw him into another headline-making comment, asked how he felt about the backlash the TV hosts had faced. Barron's response was short and to the point. "I don't really think about them. I just did what any brother would do." With that, he walked away, proving once again that while others might seek attention, Barron Trump had no interest in playing their game. He had spoken when it mattered, and for those who had been listening, that was enough. As time passed, Tiffany Trump fully embraced motherhood, sharing joyful moments of her new life with her child. Despite the initial controversy, she chose not to dwell on the negativity. Instead, she focused on creating a nurturing and loving environment for her baby. She continued to receive messages of support, and her quiet dignity throughout the ordeal only endeared her to more people. Barron, on the other hand, returned to his private life, uninterested in prolonging the media spectacle. While political, analysts speculated about whether he would take a more public role in the future. He remained focused on his studies and personal growth. Those who had underestimated him now saw him differently, not just as the youngest Trump, but as someone who had demonstrated composure and strength when it mattered most. Meanwhile, the late-night show that had sparked the controversy struggled to recover. The backlash had tarnished its reputation, and though its hosts continued their usual routines, the stain of their past remarks remained. Sponsors were hesitant, viewers were divided, and their attempt to move on felt forced. Their ratings declined, and while the media cycle eventually moved forward, the damage had been done. Despite the public discourse, Barron never spoke about the incident again. He had said his piece and stood by it. Those who tried to provoke further reactions from him were met with silence. That silence, however, spoke volumes. It was the response of someone who knew he had already won. In the end, the moment became less about the controversy and more about what it revealed. It showed that, despite the relentless scrutiny his family faced, Barron had his own voice, a voice he used not for political gain but to defend what mattered to him. It showed that Tiffany, despite the ridicule, was strong and resilient, capable of rising above the noise. Most of all, it showed that when faced with mockery, cruelty, and public ridicule, the best response isn't always to fight fire with fire. Sometimes dignity, class, and a well-timed truth are enough to silence even the loudest critics. As the months passed, life moved forward for the Trump family. Tiffany settled into motherhood with grace, sharing small glimpses of her life with her child. Though she largely stayed out of the public eye, the support she received had reaffirmed her belief in the power of resilience, and she was determined to ensure her child grew up in an environment of love and strength. Barron Trump, now more closely watched than ever, remained an enigma. While the media speculated about his future, he stayed focused on his education and personal pursuits. The moment that had thrust him into the public eye had only reinforced his quiet nature. He had no interest in engaging in petty battles or feeding the media cycle, but those who paid attention had taken note. He was no longer just the youngest Trump overshadowed by his siblings. He had proven he was willing to stand up when it mattered. The late-night hosts who had sparked the controversy never fully recovered from the backlash. Their credibility had been dented, and the viral nature of their mockery meant it would never be fully erased. Though they tried to move on with new material, the stain of their past remarks lingered. Every time they targeted another public figure, critics were quick to remind them of their hypocrisy. Over time, the world moved on, as it always does. Other scandals and controversies took center stage, and the outrage faded into history. But for those who had been watching, the lesson remained. No matter how powerful or influential the media might seem, there are moments when the truth shines through. Tiffany Trump had emerged stronger. Barron Trump had spoken when it counted, then let his silence do the rest. And the world had been reminded that dignity and integrity will always hold more weight than cheap laughs and fleeting headlines. As time went on, Tiffany Trump focused entirely on her family, shielding her child from the media circus that had once tried to humiliate her. She chose grace over bitterness, never engaging in the negativity that others had tried to stir. Instead, she devoted herself to raising her child with love, integrity, and resilience, values that had helped her endure the harsh scrutiny of public life. Barron Trump, though still young, had gained a quiet reputation for his composure. Unlike his older siblings, he had never sought the spotlight, but the way he handled the controversy had made it clear that he was not to be underestimated. His single decisive response had shut down critics more effectively than any long-winded debate. He had learned that sometimes the best way to win a battle was not to keep fighting, but to speak once and let the truth settle in. The late-night hosts, meanwhile, could never quite shake the stain of their mistake. Though they moved on to new jokes, new targets, and new controversies, their credibility had suffered a permanent bruise. The internet never forgets, and every time they attempted to take the moral high ground on other issues, their hypocrisy was brought up again. Their jokes had been meant to embarrass Tiffany, but in the end they had only embarrassed themselves. As the years went by, Barron continued to grow into his own, standing as a quiet but undeniable force in the Trump family. While the media speculated about his future, whether he would enter politics, business, or forge his own path entirely, he remained focused on the present. He had seen firsthand how the world worked, how the media twisted narratives, and how the public reacted to controversy. He had also learned the power of restraint, the strength in speaking only when necessary. Tiffany, too, continued to thrive, in her own way. Though she would never be the most public figure in her family, those who followed her saw a woman who had risen above the noise, proving that strength isn't always about fighting back. It's about refusing to be brought down in the first place. And in the end, that was the real lesson. The world had tried to turn her into a joke, but instead she had become a symbol of quiet resilience. And standing beside her, without saying a word, was the brother who had once spoken for her when she needed it most. As the years passed, Tiffany Trump continued to build a life far from the political battlegrounds that had shaped much of her family's existence. She found solace in her role as a mother, raising her child with values of kindness and strength. While the world still attached the Trump name to controversy and headlines, she focused on what truly mattered: family, love, and personal growth. Barron Trump, meanwhile, remained a figure of intrigue. He had grown into a tall, imposing presence, but his demeanor remained calm and composed. While his family name carried weight, he never sought attention for himself. Observers often speculated about his ambitions. Would he step into politics? Would he follow in his father's business footsteps? Or would he carve out a completely different path? But for those who had watched him shut down an entire panel of television personalities with a single statement, one thing was clear: Barron was in control of his own story. The late-night comedians who had mocked Tiffany had long since moved on to other targets, but their credibility had never fully recovered. Their attempt to ridicule a pregnant woman had left a sour taste in the mouths of many. While they continued making jokes about politicians and public figures, there was always a lingering awareness that they had crossed a line that even their usual audience had found distasteful. The internet never forgets, and every so often the clip of Barron's response would resurface, a reminder of how a teenager had put seasoned media personalities in their place. As Barron entered adulthood, he continued to handle public curiosity with a quiet strength. He had learned early on that the best way to win wasn't always through fighting. It was through knowing when to speak and when to let actions speak for themselves. Tiffany, having found happiness in motherhood and personal success beyond politics, often reflected on that difficult moment years ago when she had been the subject of mockery. But rather than bitterness, she felt gratitude. It had shown her who truly stood by her, who had her back when it mattered most. And it had proven that sometimes dignity and family loyalty were the greatest victories of all. In the end, the world kept spinning, scandals kept coming and going, and the media moved on to new narratives. But one thing remained: a moment when a young man, often overlooked, had stood up for his sister, not with anger, not with insults, but with a simple truth that had silenced even the loudest voices.